Hello everybody, I'm Petey the Power Dragon, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be starting up a little bit of a series, or perhaps, from a certain point of view, continuing one that I've already started. Some of you are probably aware of a video that I made, titled "The Decadent Host Might Be Coming Sooner Than You Think," where I did an overview of the Decadent Host, one of the unique factions that Duke added. Well, today we're adding one more faction to that list, and we're going to start with everyone's favorite, Empire of Man. I'm going to go over basic unit changes, basic synergies, and their general strategy, and things that have changed. So expect this to be a lengthy guide. Well, I say lengthy. Expect this to be a general guide for how they function. Note, I will not be going over things like the wizards and sorcerers. I will have to have another video covering all of the different aspects of Winds of Magic later. But as I said, later. As well as Godric and Felix, I will not be covering Godric and Felix. But if you would like to, you could take a look right there. And of course, right there. So, now that that's over with, we can start out with lords. Now there are a few lords that function just about how you'd expect. General of the Empire, Archlector, and Huntsman General. These guys are pretty similar to how they function in vanilla. Now, Toddy is where things start to get a little bit more different. Toddy is mainly based in infantry support. You'll oftentimes find him riding upon his mighty Imperial Griffin, with, generally speaking, Foe Seeker, Hold the Line, Crush the Weak, and Deadly Onslaught, as well as potentially his White Cloak of Ulrich and the Middenland Runefang. This is a bit of a Death Star unto itself, and with regeneration, he's great for general support, and when you go into his unique units, I have another video coming covering all the unique units. I will link that in the description below. But he has very good synergy with the hard hitters of the Empire. Karl Franz is a hard hitter of the Empire. Up upon Deathclaw, and generally with Galmaraz and the Reichland Runefang, Karl Franz is an exceptional duelist and anti-large character. You can find him on anything from a warhorse generally, as a frontline combatant, to an actual Deathclaw. He's very good at running alongside cavalry, with his Reichland Runefang and Galmaraz. They are very useful tools for buffing up your cavalry, and for, bringing in amazing bonus versus large and armor-piercing damage. Marcus Wolfhart, the Hunts Marshal of the Empire, has changed up his tactics a little bit. Instead of relying purely on things like his focused shot and amber bow to make him worthwhile, perhaps considering his Hunter's Snare is also a very good idea. Of course, he is a hard hitter from range, as he should be, but you'll find that his fleet-footed ability, as well as Hunter's Snare, is generally incredibly useful when you're running him alongside archers and a skirmish build. He's focused on denying enemies and being incredibly defensive while he does it. I mean, just look at that melee defense. Volkmar the Grim. Volkmar is insanely good. His battle prayers have changed around just a little bit, and of course, Jade Griffin War Altar of Sigmar combination is such a great one. His plus 25% miscast chance basically makes him a soft counter to summoners, and mixtures of Benediction, Grand Shield of Faith, Hammer of Sigmar, and Grand Soulfire, as well as even potentially Banishment, make Volkmar perhaps the most expensive to fully kit out of the entire empire, but undoubtedly a powerhouse. He may be old, but he's got a few tricks behind that mustache. Balthazar Gelt, the Sorcerer Supreme. Think of Balthazar as a general nuisance throughout the entirety of the battle. While Volkmar and Toddy buff up the front line, Franz is a heavy hitter, and Marcus is a skirmisher and defender, Balthazar Gelt is a constant mixture of support, displacement, and damage. The Lore of Metal is an incredibly handy lore of magic to have around, and in between Glittering Robe and, of course, who could forget, the combination between Glittering Robe and Plague of Rust, even sometimes Transmutation of Lead. The kind of slows and powerful amounts of damage he can lay down with Final Transmutation, Gehenna's Golden Hounds, is ungodly, and Searing Doom is, of course, fabulous. Generally speaking, on a multiplayer scene, you'll see him brought on a warhorse. Metal shifting and evasion are pretty common, but Arcane Conduit can or cannot be skipped depending on how much various spells they're bringing. Staff of Alans is pretty much a must-have, considering the minus 70% miscast chance. Alright, let's move on to our heroes, shall we? So, the Empire Captain is pretty unnotable except for a few important distinctions. Stand firm. If a unit's leadership is less than 50%, the Empire Captain can bolster them immediately with plus 60 leadership. Yes, plus 60. You'll often find him stripped down either with or without this ability. I like to bring it because it's just 81 gold. For the mixture of Hold the Line and Rally, you can base... well, I guess also technically encourage. You can keep your front line much beefier than would initially be expected. Combine that with the far more upfront buffs of the Warrior Priest, you get something truly nasty. Of course, the Warrior Priest's prayers are slightly worse than Volkmar's, but if you want to die at Volkmar, perhaps you've gone for a cheaper lord and want somebody to iron out your front line a little bit, buff it up, give it some more attack, then this frenzied berserker of a buffer is exactly who you want. Witch Hunters are criminally underrated, and between their accusation for that minus 50% speed, their slippery for plus 10% speed, their strong vigor, vanguard deployment, as well as a bit of 15% missile resistance and magic resist, not to mention discouraged for minus 10% leadership, and the absolutely nasty carnage they can do while firing alongside an infantry line, you'll oftentimes find the Witch Hunter to be probably the best, most cost-effective ranged hero, just flat out. There aren't many who can really beat his effectiveness. He tends to be a popular pick alongside Marcus Wolfhard, actually, because he's very good at running alongside skirmish infantry. Okay. Now that we've cleared out the heroes and the lords, we can move down to your infantry section. Now, you'll probably notice a few changes. Number one, you have cheap fodder now. Free Company Axemen and Free Company Spearmen. Free Company Axemen are an incredibly cheap unit with a bit of access to HP, and Free Company Spearmen are a reasonably cheap charge defense against all unit. These guys, well, to tell you the truth, they aren't exactly the tankiest. Obviously, they're definitely lacking in the armor department and a lot in the melee defense department. They have quite a chunky amount of HP, and they do have 160 models, but don't really put it past them to start running because, while a leadership of 70 sounds really good, when combined with the less sort of tanky amount of them, you'll soon realize that they'll start to scatter reasonably quickly. But nevertheless, a great chaff pick. Let's go in to some of the more frontlining units of the Empire. So, shielded spearmen and basic spearmen. You're looking at missile resistance, you're looking at balanced stats, and you're looking at a mixture of frontline holders and attackers. Basic spearmen are far better at generally fighting than the shielded spearmen, as shielded spearmen look to simply hold the line. Unshielded spearmen are a bit of a charging unit. You'll often find that swordsmen and shielded spearmen will round out somebody's front line, while units like halberdiers and regular spearmen are kind of like support for larger monsters. Same thing with Sigmar's sons, too. These guys obviously have much better melee defense and are an incredible hold-the-line unit. As for greatswords, these aren't as much the pure AP that you're used to. They're an infantry and chaff cutter. Obviously, they do have 12 AP, which is nothing to scoff at, but their main purpose is slicing through hordes of units with ease. They can cut through anything from goblins to orcs, clan rats, with incredible swiftness with that 75 melee attack, and with 49 weapon strength. They're normally always paired, however, with another unit of infantry, as with their low model count, it can be a little bit difficult for them to function in isolation. For the AP members of the group, the Flagellants and Tattersouls are used pretty similarly to how you would use them in vanilla, a frenzied, unbreakable, charging, armor-piercing support unit. While Halberdiers, instead of being a defensive unit, are an aggressive one, with 65 melee attack, focusing on charging down the line and really bringing the fight to the enemy. As for Imperial Foot and Reiksguard Foot, these are some super elite units of infantry that the Empire kind of always would like. Imperial Foot obviously have charge defense against all, and are a nice damage dealer armor-piercing unit. They stand to be a shielded halberdier unit with not only immune to psychology, but also, for the Empire, a 60-meter little effect range of +8 melee defense and immune to psychology. If you want a unit to be paired with a few other spears to defend your backline, go for Imperial Foot. Reiksguard Foot may actually have more upfront melee defense than Imperial Foot. These guys are truly tanks, 120 armor, silver shields, unlike those bloody Imperial Foot with their large halberds. These guys are an incredibly tanky unit, and very, very handy. If you perhaps are worried about maybe a large amount of mid-tier infantry, these guys are great. Now moving on to range. Well, actually here. I'll group in Free Company Militia with the infantry section. These aggressive flankers are incredibly handy to have in your army. You'll notice that they are indeed close quarters melee combatants. Most Empire units with kind of a basic shield have a decent amount of missile resistance. State troops, for instance, have quite a bit of missile resistance. And Free Company Militia are no different. They generally speak, so they have vanguard deployment and are pretty useful for general flanking, shooting into the backs of chaff, and running down units, while Sterlin's Revenge is obviously a far more elite immune to psychology version of them. Archers, crossbowmen, and huntsmen. Now, here, we'll throw in the Deathjacks, and the White Wolves, and the Longshanks. So going over the bows, crossbows, and other bowy things of the Empire, we have archers and the Deathjacks. The Deathjacks are reasonably similar to archers, only pretty proficient in melee. If you take a look at their stats, they're much more balanced. And they have snipe, meaning not only are they invisible to your enemy, but also their projectile trails are completely masked, non-existent. Archers are about what you'd expect. However, their mass amounts of arrows from their 120 models, and their 47 missile strength is absolutely nothing to scoff at. Crossbowmen have a much flatter firing arc than normal archers, but they boast a bit better armor as well as missile resistance. Their range is a bit shorter, but if you want something to deal with maybe a bit more armored targets, and if you're worried about some bigger monsters, maybe potentially a mammoth, a nice juicy line of crossbowmen can really help. Huntsmen are what most people bring if they're worried about a mammoth. These guys are pretty similar, or at least in practice, to how they're used in vanilla, but they have more melee defense and greater missile strength with much better range. While you'll see a lot of people use them skirmishing, what often ends up happening is huntsmen are placed just in front of the line. They're used to skirmish a little bit and then start to retreat, or even out on the flanks to skirmish into cavalry. The white wolves are similar to the huntsmen, basic huntsmen, but they're a bit more forgiving. If they're caught out in melee combat, they can obviously hold their own a bit longer. Their missile strength is obviously a bit more, and, of course, who could forget the fact that they have immune psychology. Now, if you truly want the best archer that the Empire have to offer, Longshanks. 65 melee attack, 85 melee defense, and 31 weapon strength. That's not a bad stat line. 85 melee defense makes them incredibly good. Wait a second, is that... immune to psychology. Vanguard deployment, 160 range, 67 missile damage. These have to be one of the most effective skirmish units, just period. They are fantastic. And they have 100 models. They aren't really limited by small unit sizes that most elite infantry or elite units can kind of face. The free reign of the Longshanks. Trust me, you'll thank me later when you bring these guys. Let's get on to guns, gunpowder, and gunpowdery guns. I know, I'm very creative. So, your basic handgunners. They obviously have much better range and missile resistance, but there are a few things to note about how handgunners function differently. Number one, they'll take longer to reload, just in general. Number two, each individual volley will be much more effective than you would expect in vanilla. Number three, handgunners are very good at getting a little bit close and personal with the enemy. And number four, their missile strength with that 30 AP. Next time you're worried about maybe, I don't know, armored trolls, anything with a bit of a thick hide, handgunners, now that's a steal. Now the silver bullets are pretty similar, but just with magic attacks and better melee defense. Not a whole lot to comment on here, just generally very handy. Nuln Ironsides. If you hadn't noticed, these guys have about as much armor as the Imperial Foot. They are tanky, and honestly, the amount of people I see that just have them stay on the front lines instead of shooting in the front lines and then retreating back to continue the skirmish is quite large. They're great at holding choke points, and they're great at firing down anything. These guys, utterly brutal. Pathfinders. So, you might have looked at Huntsman and said, you know what, that's great, I really like that, but I also want it to be a gun, and also give it snipe. Well, congratulations, you have Pathfinders. 65 melee defense. Snipe. Yeah, snipe. These are invisible, stealthily moving, capable handgunners. With, look at that, 30 AP. Glorious. Granted, they do have less range than most of their other gun counterparts, but they don't really need it when they have snipe. If you're looking for a supreme flanking force, These guys are really who you're going to want to go for. You'll often find that Marcus Wolfheart alongside Pathfinders is a brutal combination. Imperial Engineers. Now, it may say Missile Infantry, but I'm going to let you in on a little bit of a secret. These guys are axe and shotgunners. Yeah. 100 armor, 65 melee attack with AP. Axe and shotgunners. The shotguns are great at clearing out front lines. Generally, these guys are very good flankers. Swinging them around the back like Free Company militia to blast away at hordes of chaff and infantry is amazing. And they make a really nice sound while doing it. Take a look at that missile damage. 82. They even have 160 range, so it's not that risky. Plus, after that's all done, you can charge them behind any elite units, and that APX will start to do its work. So maybe you liked the range, but you wanted something with a bit more punch. Maybe a bit of cavalry. It's your lucky day. Let's start out with the lighter cavalry. Outrider Scouts and Pistoliers. Pistoliers are fairly similar to Dragoons, for instance, for any of you who might have played like Empire. They're far less of a pure missile skirmish unit and far more of a hybrid. Generally, they're a very good harasser. You'll see people running them behind enemy lines, have them be shooting while they're firing, and disrupting artillery pieces. Outrider Scouts, on the other hand, have a far more direct use. These guys are very defensive, with 80 melee defense, so they aren't necessarily the best chargers, but their name is quite literal. They're scouts. They have Strider, meaning that they can easily glide through most forests, allowing you to scout ahead, and for them to survive if they get caught out long enough for help to arrive. Okay. So maybe you said, the lighter stuff, not really my speed. I want knights, like real armored knights. Well, allow me to introduce you to Charges Home. This unit charges home, dealing extra damage in the charge. Impact Cavalry. It's as much fun as it sounds. Empire Knights are well and truly Lancers. In fact, every single Lancer cavalry acts exactly like them. Huge charge bonuses, amazing melee attack values, but with a bit more difficult melee defense values. The Reiksguard are simply a strictly better version of the Empire Knights, with generally better melee stats. And immune to psychology. These are some fantastic choices, and there really aren't any areas where they suffer, whether it be in cav fights or in pure infantry fights. Of course, the Reiksguard obviously have a bit of bonus versus large, and the Empire Knights a bit of bonus versus infantry. Take that as you will. Now, Knights of the Black Bear. How about some regenerating cavalry? Liquid Fortification. These guys are a super high impact unit of Empire cavalry with regeneration. Allow me to say that again. With regeneration. It's about as effective as it sounds. In between their 80 melee attack and 100 charge bonus, plus their pretty beefy weapon strength, these guys are brutal. And charging them in to cause massive disruption before pulling them out and regenerating any damage that they've taken is an incredibly valid strategy. Knights of the Blazing Sun, my personal favorite of the non-regiments of renown types of Empire cavalry. 10% ward save, 20% fire resistance, and 25% magic resistance. If you're worried about maybe ghosts, allow me to introduce you to Walking Ghost Kryptonite. Perhaps one of the best anti-undead units, period. End of story. They are just so ungodly good. If you want one of the most savage units off the charge, Knights of the Blazing Sun are just too good to pass up. But of course, they pale in comparison to the Charges Home, immune to psychology, and 82 charge bonus, Zintler's Reiksguard. While Knights of the Blazing Sun may not have charges home, neither do Knights of the Black Bear. Zintler's Reiksguard take that armored knight threshold to another level. 85 melee attack at 70 melee defense. That's just unnecessarily good. These guys are amazing, and I honestly think their stats speak for themselves. Oh, Demis. Even perhaps one of the best looking, no, scratch that, the best looking cavalry unit in the game, Royal Altdorf Griffites. Now, the basic Demigryph with Halberdiers don't actually have charges home, but they do have fear. They have better melee defense. These are a more defensive unit of Demigryph Knights, but do not get me wrong, they're still incredibly good at charging. If you're potentially looking to take a cav fight, or maybe you're fighting Norska and you're worried about some monsters, Demigryph Halberdiers are just too good not to pass up. Demigryph Knights, on the other hand, are when you're worried about infantry. Just look at this. This is beautiful. Just, oh, amazing. And I do believe that this goes without saying, but just in case, life magic with any of this is fabulous. In between the vigor regrowth and the regeneration for their relatively low model count, it's fabulous. There's no other experience quite like it. In between the charges home, 95 charge bonus, and yeah, base incredibly good melee stats. These guys are so much fun. But of course, causes fear, causes terror. 100 charge bonus, 90 melee attack, 70 melee defense, 125 armor. The Royal Altdorf Griffites. If you thought that Royal Altdorf Griffites from vanilla were good, you're gonna love these guys. And trust me, I do. So now that I think I've gotten you interested in the infantry, practically chomping at the bit to start firing with missile infantry, and of course, charging in with cavalry, we'll start chomping on the bit with cavalry and chariots. Let's go over war wagons. War wagons have been changed quite a bit. You'll notice their large amount of missile resistance, but there's one thing that'll probably stand out. 600 ammunition. War wagons are one of the best things to bring if you're prepared for an artillery duel. They can take shots and they can continuously dish out pressure. From a skirmish standpoint, absolutely amazing. Obviously, not very good at melee, but their large amount of ammunition, great range, and good missile strength makes up for that. Mortar war wagons simply don't pack the same amount of ammunition. In fact, they actually have less than the basic mortars, but they bring the utter impact that is mortar shrapnel to the mobility that is a 50-speed wagon. And the Black Lions. I think you can get where I'm going with this, right? Absolutely stunning unit. I'm gonna tell you right now, Chaos players, you can kiss those chosen goodbye when these guys roll up. Unless if they have the Mark of Siege, in which case, you can keep them. Outriders! Vanguard deployment. Pretty okay melee stats. Not great, but okay. And of course, 82 missile strength. Now, these guys are oftentimes paired with the Marcus Wolfhard skirmish crew. Same thing with Outrider with grenade launchers. Outriders are great at sniping into the back of cavalry and cavalry engagements, and then running away, as well as shooting away at any potential monsters or monsters' infantry. While grenade launchers are great for running ahead of your infantry line specifically, and just displacing everything with their massive shrapnel shots. Of course, they aren't that good against units with shields, because of how shrapnel functions. Artillery time. Let's start out with the basic shot units. Alright, mortar. A mortar is like an army damager. They're very, very good in sieges, and that oftentimes will be when you'll find yourself using them. For instance, for all you campaign players out there, I know, I'm one of them as well. It's great. If you're worried about having to crack away at units at walls, look no further. The shrapnel from mortars, as well as the wide firing arcs, makes them fantastic at it. As for great cannons, these guys are the penultimate field fighters. They can shoot down things like towers, even, and are great at sniping away at larger monsters, cavalry, and shooting into large sort of spaghetti-lined units of infantry. Although positioning is key with great cannons. You don't have to worry about it as much with mortars, but with great cannons, it's incredibly important. Same thing with Hammer of the Witches. So, Hammer of the Witches has less range than a normal great cannon, but has magical attacks. Obviously, a bit more situational. And 25% physical resistance. It's okay. Oh, and also 6 more of them, or 2 more of them. Yeah. Hammer of the Witches is pretty good. Generally, if you're looking just to spelunk away at a ghost or two, maybe worried about some hex wraiths, you know what to call. And if you think that you're going to have the high ground, you know what to call. In a purely open field for battle of shooting all the infantry, Hellblaster Volley Gun. I'm sorry, but did a mobile machine... Well, I say mobile. Did a machine gun nest not interest you? That's weird. You're weird. These guys are awesome. They are a field gun to another level. Now, 380 range doesn't seem like a whole lot, and it definitely isn't. In terms of how you generally see people use, well, not use Hellblaster Volley Guns vanilla, what you'll tend to see is people run these guys with a few units of cavalry around them. Place them up towards a hill, or try and walk them up to a position where they can get clean lines of fire down the length of an infantry unit. Obviously, they're incredibly difficult to use, and you have to be a little bit greedy to try and pull one of these guys off. But they're just the kind of ambition and flashy play that everybody loves to see work out. Steam Tank. I mean, it's a steam tank. It's pretty similar to how you see people use it in vanilla. Line it up down the end of an infantry unit and blast away. Of course, a steam tank doesn't have Unbreakable in the end times, and you'll find it far more useful as, well, a tank. 160 armor, 10,000 HP, and 50% missile resistance. Generally speaking, it takes a lot to bring these things down, and they are great generalists for infantry support, but, of course, keep in mind, they're very expensive. Now, let's say you want to blaze your enemies in a bout of holy fire. Well, to finish us off, let's talk about some of the most popular Empire units. I'll save the most popular for last. Luminarchs. Luminarchs are monster killers. There's not a whole lot more to say about them. Of course, they do help to buff up your units, with Locus of Hysh and Aura of Protection, but they actually find themselves being almost at a detriment when you bring a wizard. It's a bit strange, but do not underestimate 2,500 missile strength. And with the Tempelhof Luminarch, definitely don't underestimate it. Obviously, with a basic Luminarch, you only have 12 shots. So, while you may be confident in the idea that your opponent is really going to try and snipe these things out, if you think that you're going to be in a very safe position to keep hammering away, a net of Ammontok plus 40 ammunition, glorious. These guys are just so darn fun. They require a lot of setup, and obviously they're very slow. But They are super satisfying to use. Now, Hellstorm rocket launchers and the Sunmaker have been pretty radically changed. Obviously, they act similarly to mortars in terms of armor piercing dealers, but you'll notice that the Hellstorm rocket launcher is actually quite cheap, and that's because it's only a single model. Yeah, these guys are kind of similar to how you would use the field guns, but they're a lot cheaper. Placing them on a hill or near a well-fortified position allows you to just hammer away incessantly. The Sunmaker brings pretty much the same as the Hellstorm rocket battery, but of course a little bit less good in melee in trade-off for much better missile strength. And, you know, flaming attacks. The Hellstorm rocket launcher is a very good choice, but generally don't bring more than one. And, of course, this guide is built in mind that you already know some of the basics of the end times. There are plenty of very good end times guides out there, and I would highly recommend that you look them out. I will put a link in the description for a specific channel that you guys can check out for some end times content. A channel by the name of Edraig. So, in the meantime, I hope you guys are all doing well, and I'll see you on the next time. Hope it was helpful. Goodbye.